Ron, I'm not alone this week.
Okay.
Morris is here also.
Oh,
That's good.
Actually, I'm sitting in your seat.
I don't think we've all been here long enough in this room to have assigned seats yet.
Oh.
There we go. I see a 48A now. There it is. Well, let's see if we got to get a running start at this. So, yeah, one sentence back. Why is this chapter 640? Okay, chapter 648A. All right, there we go. The Gemara asks. Okay, so we were in the middle of, I don't have the text here in front of me.
No.
We were in the middle of trying to prove
People should be buried.
whether or not people are required to be buried by Torah law or whether the requirement to bury people is just a minhag. And there was all kinds of analysis around this from different Torah verses that showed good people being buried or bad people being buried or bad people not being buried, and then trying to draw the conclusion that if you're told a bad person shouldn't be buried, does that tell you that ordinarily they should or that ordinarily they shouldn't? And if bad people shouldn't, does that mean good people should? And all that kind of Talmudic logicking. And that's what they did for a really long time.
Th-
So,
th- This week's parsha with Chaye Sarah, we got into some of the burial. Is anything from? Do we derive any law from Bereshis, or is
very little law is actually derived from Bereshit. It is possible to derive law from Bereshit. The piece out of Chaye Sarah that we derive as halacha is that a Jew needs to be buried in Jewish land, Karka Yisrael, which means it doesn't mean you have to be buried in the land of Israel, but you need to own the land that you are buried in, or the land needs to be owned by Jews, which has a practical implication with secular law in America. Because in many states, and I don't know exactly how it works in New Jersey, if you own a plot, you'll tell me how it works. In some places, you purchase the land of your plot from the cemetery association and you own that land. In other places, you have to purchase like not a deed to the plot, but almost like a rental rights to the plot. And the cemetery association remains the owner of the plot. Here, I believe you actually get a deed in New Jersey, so you own the land. So it's really not an issue about Jewish, non-Jewish as much, unless a non-Jewish person purchases the plot for you, in which case you're being buried in non-Jewish land, technically. So we should not be selling a plot to a non-Jew. That doesn't mean we can't bury a non-Jew in the plot. That's a whole different question. But a Jew should be buried in Jewish land, and that's learned from the cave of Machpelah in Chaye Sarah, where Abraham negotiates for the price and insists on paying a price.
Are you allowed to be buried in the backyard of your house?
Of course you can be buried in the backyard of your house by Jewish law. New Jersey would have a lot to say about that because you actually have to be zoned as a cemetery. You need to have a license to bury a body in New Jersey, which doesn't surprise you. You need to have a license to break wind in New Jersey, basically. I mean, it's a state that has rules and licenses and a bureau for everything, right? But you need to have a license to bury a body in New Jersey. Not just anybody's allowed to do it. You need to actually be a funeral home director to bury a body.
Unless if there's a cremation, you can put the ashes.
Unless your name is Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, so the Gemara asks, and Rava, what is the reason he does not derive the verbal analogy from a heifer whose neck is broken? And the Gemara says, Rava would have said to you that we derive the halacha governing the accessories related to dead people, the shroud. We did this from the halacha governing the accessories used in idol worship and the animal sacrifice to the idol. That is to the exclusion of a heifer whose neck is broken, which is itself consecrated for the ceremony taking place in the valley and is not accessory used in the, okay. So they had drawn an analogy from the rule about breaking the neck of the heifer between the two towns where a body is found and nobody knows who killed him. And the two towns swear an oath that neither of them had anything to do with this death. And they have a ceremony where they break the neck of a heifer and then they have to bury the guy. the argument is whether or not that ceremony is analogous to regular burial or not, and is a treatment of the red heifer analogous to the burial shroud or not? Is it something that is just accidental? They both are happening at the same time, or is it something that's mandated? They're part of the same behavior. If they're part of the same behavior, then you could say what you learn about how to bury in one case, you have to apply to the other case. But if the two things are separate from each other, then what you learn in one case, you cannot apply to the other case. So Rava would say that we derive the halacha about accessories, the shroud and everything.
Is this because this heifer, a dead body was found between two cities,
That's
and
the Torah case. The Torah case is a dead body is found between two cities, and you don't know which city to blame it on. And both cities say we had nothing to do with it. Now you have to say which city has the obligation to bury. And if it's halfway in between, both cities share the obligation, but they have to have a little ceremony where they swear that they had nothing to do with the death of this person. And then they both go ahead with the burial.
so
I mean, this is that a long time ago, right?
That's in the Torah, right? But they're bringing it up here as a basis. Can I make an analogy? What I do with the red heifer is what I have to do with the shroud. And if the red heifer goes with the burial of the guy, then the shroud has to go with the burial of the guy. That's what they were trying to make an analogy to. We're going to get through this and leave it behind as quickly as we can. All right. So Rava would say this is to the exclusion of the heifer whose neck is broken, which is itself consecrated to the ceremony taking place in the valley, and it's not an accessory used in that ceremony. It's its own thing. So the Gemara says, and Abaye, what is the reason he did not derive the halacha? By way of a verbal analogy from the halacha governing accessories used in idol worship, which was the other case we used. The Gemara said that was what Rava used. So Abaye used the red heifer, but Rava wouldn't accept it. Rava used idolatry, but Abaye wouldn't accept it. So why wouldn't Abaye accept Rava's argument? Well, he would say that we learn the halacha governing something that involves a proper way of conduct, burying the dead, from the halacha governing something that involves a proper way of conduct. This computer is going to drive me crazy. I touch it the slightest bit and it scrolls through all these pages. Okay, so Abaye in the middle here. We learn that something that involves a proper way of conduct, like the red heifer, from something else that is a proper way of conduct. You don't learn something that is not a proper way of conduct to apply to something that's a proper way of conduct. In other words, you can't learn from idolatry to a positive mitzvah because idolatry is a negative mitzvah. So you can't say just because you were supposed to or not supposed to bury something having to do with idolatry that you should or shouldn't bury something that has to do with a regular person. Okay? So then he would say they're not analogous. The Gemara presents a mnemonic. Yay! Lots of garbled Hebrew letters for us to remember because it makes us easier to remember other things, which is never the case. Right? So here's the mnemonic. Siman. Kappa, nafsheya, dechatsiba, nechisa, deumana. So obviously remembering that is going to help you understand and remember the entire Talmudic argument that's coming. So the Gemara presents a mnemonic for the forthcoming series of attempted proofs concerning the dispute between Rav and Abaye, the scarf, the monument that was hewed, the pouch, and the craftsman. And we're going to go through them one by one. Meitzve, kappa. Okay.
Isn't a mnemonic supposed to say something to get, to remember? I mean, this just seems like a series of words.
Well, they're actually abbreviations. So
Yeah.
they have these little double dots in between, these little tip.
Yeah, the
And so what is probably going to happen is that kaf pei hey will have something to do with the logic or the verses of the case of the kappa, which is a scarf.
Yeah.
Okay. Nafsheha will have something to do with the verses or the arguments having to do with the monument, even though that spells out the word monument. The chatsiba, right? Something that has been hewn. And nechisa is something from your keys, it's a pouch. And the umana sounds like, from an oman, a craftsman. But these are going to be abbreviations of other things used in each of these cases to spell out the logic.
Right.
let's just say, for the deeply enmeshed Talmudic scholar, this would be a helpful mnemonic, but there's no expectation that for us it will be.
It could be a test for Alzheimer's.
A test for Alzheimer's, we would all fail and be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Meitvei kapa shehu tameh midras unitanato lesefer tahor min hamidras aval tameh ema nitno v'charchato. So the Gemara says an objection against Rava from a baraita. Meitvei means I'm challenging you from a baraita. Talking about ritual impurity that is contracted by treading, by stepping on something impure. If a scarf is ritually impure, with impurity imparted by stepping, which is a very low level of impurity, but nevertheless impure. So for example, a zav, somebody who has had an emission from their genitalia, who is thereby impure for a day, if that person sat or lay down upon the scarf, and its owner then designated it as a cover for a Torah scroll, it is pure of the more severe level of ritual impurity, that which is imparted by treading, even without immersion, because it is no longer an object intended to be lied on or sat upon. Okay, so what's going on here? And yes, we're going to be dealing with purity and impurity for a while here. The rabbis had a whole system of purity and impurity. The highest level of impurity is coming in contact with a dead body. Any object or person that comes in contact with a dead body, that thing is impure, and it's like having cooties. It can communicate or transmit that impurity to somebody else. You're not allowed, in general, to intentionally make something impure unless you're doing a mitzvah. So obviously you're going to make yourself impure by preparing a dead body for burial, because that's a mitzvah. But if there's something impure lying on the table and you can avoid touching it, you should avoid touching it. You should not allow yourself to become impure. And you should not let it touch something else that you don't want to become impure. Okay? So here's the case. Somebody who is impure because of a natural emission from their body, it doesn't make them bad, but it renders them technically impure. They sit on a textile, a cloth, a square piece of cloth. And then, it's a nice piece of cloth, and I own it, and I say, you know what? I want to give that piece of cloth to the minyan to use as a Torah cover, right? During the Misha Berachs, we need a new Torah cover. I'm going to give a Torah cover for the Misha Berachs, but it's impure. Torah scrolls, however, are pure, or a higher level, right? They have their own impurity to it, but Torah scrolls can render you impure if you touch them. That's why you have handles and a thing. So Torah scrolls are so holy that they render you impure if you touch them. So you have a minor impurity, and you have a Torah level impurity, right? And can you touch them to each other, right? So he would say if a scarf is ritually impure, with the impurity imparted by treading, by walking on it or sitting on it, and its owner designates it for cover to the Torah scroll, it is pure of the more severe level of ritual impurity, that which is imparted by treading, even without immersion, because it is no longer an object intended to be lied on or sat upon. Okay, what does that mean? A couple of other things. One of the ways you take something that is impure and you make it pure is you immerse it in a mikveh, right? Some people think this is just women around their cycle of menstruation. Not true. Any object can be rendered pure by placing it in a mikveh. Some people take their keli, their dishes, and they'll put them in the mikveh before they use them. That's from an ancient custom that you could take objects that were impure and you could immerse them in the mikveh and they come out pure. So you don't even need to render this thing pure or impure, because you are taking something with a low level of tumah, impurity, and you're putting it into a position of higher level tumah, and you don't have to worry about that other level of tumah if it's not going to be used for that purpose anymore. So this thing that has sitting on tumah from a zav, right? And it's going to go to the Torah scroll. The zav level tumah doesn't apply because you're not going to sit on it ever again, right? You're not going to sit on the Torah scroll. You're not going to sit on the mantle from the Torah scroll. It's not like when I take the mantle off the Torah scroll in Shul, I put it down on my chair so I can be more comfy and I sit on it. That would be terrible, right? Okay. So in other words, you don't worry about the two different levels of tumah. This is the Gemara raises an objection against Rava about ritual impurity that is contracted by treading. Okay, so let's read it through again. The scarf is ritually impure, with impurity imparted on by treading or sitting, like a zav sat on it, and its owner then designated for a Torah scroll. It's pure of the more severe level of ritual impurity, that which was imparted by the treading, even without immersion, because it's no longer an object intended to be lied upon. So you might be worried that this high level of tumah from the zav, the person, is going to be a problem putting onto the Torah scroll, which is considered here a lower level of tumah. You're not worried about it because it's not going to be sat on again. The Torah is not going to be sat on, right? But it's still impure with the lesser severe level of impurity, that which is contracted by touching that which has been treaded upon. So the treaded upon thing, you'll get its highest level of tumah if you also tread upon it. So if someone sits on the scarf and they're impure, if you sit on the scarf, you get the highest level of impurity you can from that. But if you just touch it, pick it up and move it, you're getting a lower level, a touching level, which is not considered as high. Indicates that the mere designation has halachic significance and validity. Remember, Rava was talking about being able to dedicate something that was pure or impure, right? Can you dedicate something and then still have use from it? Or if you dedicate it, is it permanently that thing? So I dedicate a goat as a sacrifice, but then I don't sacrifice it. Can I sell the goat? Rava says yes. Dedicating doesn't mean you can never benefit from it again. So they're bringing up a case here where you can dedicate something and it becomes permanently whatever that dedication was. So they're using purity and impurity here with the scarf to say, look, I've got a high level impurity and I dedicate it to an act that has a low level impurity. The scarf then takes on low level impurity. Dedication has to be effective and permanent. That's why they're bringing this up. Okay? So Rava, dedication is effective and permanent. That's what they're trying to say. So this indicates that mere designation has halachic significance and validity. The Gemara rejects this argument, however, which you've got to love because the Gemara is the one that raised the argument, and now the Gemara is rejecting the argument. Say instead that the Baraita should read as follows. So they're going to solve this by rewriting the Baraita. The owner of the scarf designated it as a cover for a Torah scroll and wrapped it around the scroll so that there was not only a designation but an action as well. So they're saying Rava, designation is effective. And Rava would say that's not really what they meant. They designated it and then they actually used it. So obviously if you designate a goat for a sacrifice and you actually sacrifice it, you can't then sell it. So this is a case where they dedicated the cloth and then they used it for that purpose. It's not a bad response. Now the Gemara is going to ask, if there was an action, why do I need the Baraita to say that if the owner designated it and wrapped it? Wouldn't wrapping alone have sufficed? So if you're going to rewrite the Baraita, it says, so that it's designated and wrapped, that's cute. But why don't you just say wrapped? Because when you wrap it, you've already given it, right? Wouldn't wrapping alone have sufficed? The Gemara says that the Baraita is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says that with regard to this cloth that one designated for the purpose of bundling phylacteries in it, if he already bundled phylacteries in it, it is forbidden to bundle coins in it, as it was designated and used as an accessory for a sacred object. But if he merely designated it for the purpose, but did not yet bundle the phylacteries in it, or if he bundled the phylacteries in it, but did not previously designate it for bundling phylacteries, it is still permitted to bundle coins in it. Consequently, in the case of the scarf, it was necessary to say he designated it and he actually wrapped it. Okay? So the answer to the answer is, well, there's designating and there's using, and they are different things. So, Morris, do you have a special bag for your tefillin?
Do you have a special what?
Bag for your tefillin.
Yes, I do.
So do I.
Yeah.
Right?
Right,
Okay, that's pretty normal.
yeah.
Can you take the tefillin out of the bag and use the bag as a wallet?
No, that's not totally.
According to Rav Chisda, the answer is yes, if you didn't designate it for tefillin.
Oh,
So my tefillin actually has embroidered on it the
Tefillin.
bag has embroidered on it the word tefillin, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a tefillin bag that says tefillin on it, it has been designated for the use of tefillin. And then once you put tefillin in it, that bag can never be used for anything else again. Only tefillin. By the way, in my family, that means it has tefillin, gum, my Torah reading yad, and a small siddur. Right? That's all in there. Don't tell anyone. Right? Now, is that permitted as long as it's being used for tefillin? It depends whether or not you want the rabbi to have access to gum in the middle of services, I guess. Right? Mints, maybe? I mean, every once in a while, you got to take a mint if you're in a, would you rather the rabbi use a mint?
It's all holy. The siddur is holy, the right hands are holy.
Yeah, all those things are to be used in the service, to make the service more pleasant for everyone, right? That's the whole purpose of it. My wife has in her tallis bag, anyone who sits anywhere near my wife has seen this happen on Shabbat morning, she has a deck of cards in there, right?
Those the cards your kids use?
Because my kids can't stand to sit through services for 2.5 hours, and so she'll break out the deck of cards and give it to them, and they'll just play a game of cards with each other on the bench. Is that bad? I'm sure there's a couple of people looking around with their eyes up like this saying, how can the rabbi's kids be playing cards in shul? How disrespectful.
Yeah, they're in the
How realistic. They're being parents. They're being good parents.
Well, my
I know they're-
answer is look around the room and see how many kids are in shul, and then tell me that mine aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I guarantee you mine are the best behaved kids in the shul because they're the only ones here. Right? And if you want to drive away the literally last children in your synagogue, then please, by all means, drive away the last children in the synagogue. Like realistic is correct. You know what I mean? But ideally, I mean, obviously, if Jeff Moss and David Blady and those guys in the back break out a deck of cards, I'm going to have a problem with them. Right? There's an adult thing. Anyways, can the tallis bag be used for a deck of cards?
If it's not designated, yes.
I think that deck of cards has been designated to use in shul. They never bring that deck of cards home. Right? It's almost like
It's part of the service.
it's what allows them to be present for the Torah reading. You know what I mean? If they have to sit there with their eyes rolling and their hands in their laps, bored out of their minds with the siddur closed in front of them for 2.5 hours, you think they're going to pay attention to the Torah reading? Right? Like, we'll lose them forever. So anyways, so he says it's interesting. I like this teaching. Your tefillin bag, if you never designated it for tefillin, you can use it for anything, even if you used it for tefillin. But if you designated it and you never put tefillin in it, it's still an open argument. But if you have designated it and put tefillin in it, it's a closed argument. Okay? Okay. By the way, in modern synagogue life, this is the pledge, right? This is the unpaid pledge. Somebody pledges $50,000 to the capital campaign, and then they give it to the university, right? Are they allowed to give their pledged money somewhere else?
I thought there'd been lawsuits about that.
Yeah, there've been lawsuits about that, but they're all lost. A pledge is not a legally binding thing unless you draw up a contract, right? A verbal pledge, I'm going to give $1 million to the synagogue, is nothing. Even if they make annual installments on it for 5 years, you can't collect the rest of the missing money based on the precedent of the installments. You simply cannot force collect a charitable gift unless there's a contract binding them to it. So I would say morally and ethically, however, if you have pledged money to a charitable cause, you have to pay that money, and you shouldn't give that money to some other charitable cause, right? All right, anyways.
Just a point about designate. When
Yep.
you bought that tefillin bag or tallit bag, you bought that in mind to do a purpose of holding your tefillin or tallit. No?
Correct. Correct. But I have an example. I have in my office, in various states of disrepair, probably 20 different sets of tefillin that I've opened up, and the parchments are bad, or the straps were rotting, or people have donated tefillins. Grandpa passes on and none of the kids want the tefillin. What are we going to do with it? We give it to the shul, and I use them for educational purposes. I have shopping bags full of these broken up sets of tefillin. Okay. I will take tefillin if I can put together a couple that are good. I don't have tefillin bags for them all. So I have envelopes. I'll get these mailing envelopes and I'll open it up and I'll put a set of tefillin in and I'll close it and I'll write tefillin on the envelope. Can I ever use that envelope for another purpose now?
No, not from what you're saying.
Right. If I didn't write tefillin on the envelope, it's just what I happened to put the tefillin in. Then when I get a better bag, I can take the tefillin out. I can use the envelope. Right? It's actually a real case. I have tefillin sitting in envelopes in my office. Okay.
So this answers the question why when you buy talis and tefillin bags, they say talis and tefillin on them. I never thought of that before.
Correct. I mean, if you have those two bags, don't you know which one is the talis and which one is tefillin? Do you really need the name on it?
Right.
The big one's the talis and the little one's the tefillin. Hello. Right? But no, it actually dedicates that bag for that purpose. Okay. Who would like to read according to Abaye?
I can do it.
Go ahead.
And according to Abaye, who said that designation is a significant matter, the halacha is as follows. If he designated the cloth for the purpose of bundling phylacteries in it, even if he did not bundle phylacteries in it, it is prohibited to bundle money in it. Well, is that because you're not supposed to carry money on Shabbos and holidays?
No.
No? Oh, well, getting too complicated.
You wear tefillin on weekdays, Francesca.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Because then there's morning and evening prayers. So much for that theory. Anyway, in a case where he already bundled phylacteries in it, if he's designated the cloth for bundling phylacteries, yes, it is prohibited to bundle money in it. But if he did not designate it for bundling phylacteries, bundling money in the cloth is not prohibited. So it's the same thing because you don't have it designated.
The other point of view, Abaye says once you dedicate something, it is dedicated.
Right.
So the fact that the bag has the word tefillin on it, it doesn't matter if you even own a pair of tefillin. You may not use that bag to carry your money in it. Right? Now, this also gives you an insight into the reality. Back then, evidently, people didn't have pockets. Right? All of our clothes are made with all these pockets in them, say the men. Women know this problem. Women have handbags because women's clothing almost never has effective pockets. Right? So back when you didn't have pockets, you would have taken your tefillin bag and you would have put your money in it so you can go get the milk and eggs on the way home from Minyan. Can you do that? It was actually a very realistic question. Okay? And Abaye has the same thing. You buy it for that purpose. It doesn't matter if you used it for the purpose. It's designated and limited to that purpose. Okay, Tashma, we're going to get another case, and this will be the monument. Remember, we're going through, I think it was 5 or 6 of these according to the mnemonic. Francesca, go ahead.
Okay, the Gemara suggests, come in here another proof against Rava. With regard to a monument that was built as a memorial for the sake of an individual while he was still alive, one is permitted to derive benefit from it as it is like any other construction. But if even a single row of the stones was added to it for the sake of a corpse, one is prohibited from deriving benefit from it, apparently even before the deceased is buried there. This seems to indicate that mere designation is a significant matter. The Gemara answers, with what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where the corpse placed under the monument so that it became forbidden not through mere designation, but by way of an action.
Okay, so it's the same logic in a different case. You buy, you've been to cemeteries that have the large family headstone and then a bunch of little footstones where the people actually get buried in front of the family headstone. Has everyone seen that?
Yes.
Okay, so you buy the big family headstone and there's nobody buried there. And you know what? I need a really big stone because I'm putting an addition on my house. Can I take that stone and use it in the wall of my house?
No.
No.
Well, Rava would say yes,
Why?
because he thinks that only using it matters. And Abaye would say no, designating it is what matters, right?
That's what I
And
would
so-
think.
Right. So this is a monument that was for the sake of an individual who was alive. You're permitted to derive benefit from it like any other construction. But if a single row of stones was added to it for the sake of a corpse, it's prohibited. Right? So that stone, you would say, well, why can't that stone be used? Somebody else got buried next to it, but that stone was for me and I haven't used it yet. Why is it being prohibited to me? And the answer to that would be, well, there's a corpse there. It was meant to be used for corpses. And once there's one in there, you're done. Right? So the argument is just the same argument. Nothing is proven or solid. It's just they have another case of dedication, non-dedication, and they're going to apply the Abaye Rava logic to it. That's all that's happening here.
Would
So
it
now
be
that-
considered theft?